So today we're here once again at St Elizabeth Parish in Wallasey, and today we're here with Fr Justin, who's very kindly agreed to do an interview with us. So, Father, could you just tell people about what was your spiritual life as a kid? Did you come from a religious family, non-religious?
No, my family wasn't religious at all, which, looking back, I'm actually quite grateful for, because I came to Orthodoxy with a pretty clean slate.
Yeah.
Whereas if I came from some other Christian background, it probably would have been a bit more confusing. There's more adaptations. But no, my family wasn't religious at all. I think at some point in my life, I started to feel the need for it, and then I started to search, and then bit by bit, one thing led to another, and then discovered Orthodoxy. And then when I got there, I knew
This is the final place.
This is the truth. Yeah.
So you just said that you realised you need something and you started to try and discover things. So could you tell us a bit about that journey? Where did that lead you? Was it straight to Orthodoxy overnight?
No, it's a bit of a roundabout way. I mean, I say I didn't have any Christian hang-ups, but I suppose I had a few others. But even as a kid, I remember asking my mom what happens to you when you die, for instance. She would say, "Don't ask those kinds of questions." So I was wondering such things, but
yeah.
But I had a relationship with a girl who was pretty much atheist, I suppose, and I ended up following that path. But the deeper you go into things that aren't true, you realize how empty it is, and then you end up coming out of it, and then I knew that I was still had that need. I was feeling like I needed something to fulfill me, and seeing as all the views of Christianity that I had, it's mostly sort of Protestant views and things like that, they all looked so insipid. I thought, no ways I'm going to try and get involved in that. I'll go the other way, and I'm going to go into Far Eastern philosophy, Far Eastern religion. I went to India, I had 2 trips in India. First trip was 9 months, stayed there a long time.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. Second trip was about 2 or 3 months, stayed in ashrams, and really, went into it and tried to learn it and everything. But there was still just something missing, And I had the good fortune that somewhere during that period, there was a lot of up and down traveling and whatnot, but I had come across they were trying to make an Orthodox monastery in South Africa, and a friend of mine was doing the sound engineering for a sort of feast day they were having. And he said to me, "You've got to come out and see this." So there was these 3 monks living out there in the bundus in the veld, and he says, "You just got to come and take a look." So I went, and you see these guys with beards down to here, and the great schema on, and wearing black and everything, and living in these little shacks out there in the wilds. I thought, whoa, man, this is awesome. This is crazy. If this is Christianity, well, that's like a totally different version of Christianity that I've been exposed to. Anyway, so I was interested, and I went and chatted with the abbot, Father Nazarius. And at that time, I guess I wasn't really ready for it, because he said a few things which, looking back now, I suppose, if I see them differently, and maybe I understand what he was saying, but at the time, it just confused me, and I thought, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I decided rather to continue with, the other sort of trajectory of my journey. But once I came to the end of the whole Hindu thing and whatever, the Far Eastern religions, I thought to myself, there's still one thing that I have to understand. And I knew it was that. I had to go back to Orthodoxy and say, why is this the true faith? What makes this different?
Yeah.
Why do they say this? What kind of a claim is that? And so I had to discover it. And then I went back, and I couldn't even actually remember exactly where the place was, because so many years had passed. But I started driving around, and I knew the area more or less. But it's quite out in the sticks, in a rural area. And I drove, and I thought, this looks familiar. And I thought, yeah, this. And then eventually I came across the gate, and I thought, yeah, this is it. So I knocked on the gate, and it turned out the whole thing had fallen apart. The abbot had died. The other Hira monk had renounced his vows, basically, and gone back into the world.
Wow.
And then the other one, who at the time was Brother Matthew, he in the meantime had become Father Seraphim. He'd been ordained by the local bishop into the priesthood as Father Seraphim, and he was serving in some parish about 2 hours away from Johannesburg. So I got hold of him, and then through him, I slowly started to. He gave me a few books, and I started to pray, and bit by bit things like that fell into place, and then eventually it came to the point where I just understood. Understood that this is it, and
but naturally, it just
and I never looked back. I just knew, I just knew. I came to the point where I stopped asking the question, how can I relate this to the other faiths? And it really came down to this: either you believe it and you accept that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that this is the true faith and that everything is real, even if you don't understand it completely, or you don't. In which case, fine, just reject it and then carry on doing whatever else you want to do. But if you do accept that this is the truth, then you believe it wholeheartedly, and it's as simple as that. Jesus Christ is the Lord, and you live it like that. You take it on faith, and then you just grow deeper and deeper into it. And I've never ever, like I said, looked back. It's just the faith just gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's no end to it. So
it's impossible for one human to.
No, exactly. You can never plumb the depths. The spirituality just never ends. Orthodoxy.
So once you're in South Africa at this point, and you've become Orthodox. How did you end up joining the priesthood?
Well, that's a whole other story. I'll try and be brief. Yeah, so I wanted to become Orthodox, through my contact with Father Seraphim. So I went to whichever local church I had, because he was, he had his parish, but it was about, like I said, 2 hours away from Johannesburg. So right next to my family's house was a Russian church.
Oh,
so
right, okay.
I started going there, which was Moscow Patriarchate, and spoke to the church there, the priest there, Father Daniel, and he said to me, well, of course he didn't know me from bar soap, and he said to me, well, if you come for only 3 months, he said, if you come for 3 months every Sunday, I'll baptize you. So I was like, okay, fine. So in any case, I was getting my catechism and everything else from Father Seraphim, so I didn't feel like I was just completely abandoned or lost. But basically I stuck it out. It was quite easy, and then he baptized me, and then I had this idea in my mind that I really wanted to be a monk, because I was just going full force, and just diving into the deep end. And especially from my experience with these other guys living in the wilds there, it just stole my heart. I just thought this was wonderful, and so I wanted to be a monk. And Father Seraphim was still a monk. He was a higher monk, but we had no monastery to go to. We had no way to live a sort of monastic life, and so we ended up tracking down that guy, the monk who had renounced his vows, because the land of the monastery belonged to him. And we asked him if we could go and stay on that land again and try and sort of revive some kind of a monastic life there. He said, that's fine, go ahead. So Father Seraphim and I moved into this, what used to be their little growing monastery, and we stayed in these little tin shacks and got up at night and did little services in this tiny little chapel and with candles, and I loved it. I was just totally in my element, sleeping on a plank, and I just thought, this is it.
So holy.
Yeah, and this my whole discovery of Orthodoxy coincided with my discovery of the icon then, of course, because you can't, inevitably you're going to find them. You can't separate them. And seeing as I've always been an artist and painting, when I saw that, I also just knew, this is it, this is what, because, contemporary artists really suffer because they feel like they have to innovate or something like that, because they don't have a tradition, they don't have a ground to fall back on. And when I saw this, I just thought, this is beautiful. I can just step into this and enter into this living tradition. And so I started learning more and more. We were staying in that monastery, and over time I realized that my icons didn't look like what they were supposed to look like. They didn't look like the icons in the books. And in those days it was like you didn't have YouTube videos, and you didn't have easy access to teachers or anything like that. And in South Africa especially, there was nobody who knew how to paint icons. So I started writing letters to monasteries in Russia, Mount Athos, places in Greece, wherever, anywhere, but nobody really helped, which I can understand as well. It's difficult to go to a monastery without some kind of introduction and say, hey, I'm here and I want you to teach me iconography and make me a monk. So it was difficult to find anyone, and then eventually I did find a guy who had been the disciple of another guy I was actually trying to get hold of, who was a monk, and this guy said, no, he doesn't have contact with him anymore. This was in France. But he's looking for an apprentice. So I said, okay, fine. So I packed up in the monastery in South Africa. I said, sorry to Father Seraphim, but I have to follow this path. And it's not that I wanted to stop being a monk, but I really wanted to learn iconography, and it was my only chance, was to basically go out of the monastery, back into the world, learn with this guy, and then once I had learned, then I'd be happy to go back. But Father Seraphim was a little bit of a complicated figure, and by the time I'd learned enough with this guy that I felt comfortable to sort of move out, in South Africa, that monastery with Father Seraphim had fallen to pieces. He'd gone back to his parish, but I don't know, he had some kind of dispute with his parish as well, so I didn't even know where he was anymore. Orthodoxy is full of wonderful scandals, you know. Anyway, but I mean, it's people are complicated.
Yeah.
And so I had nothing to go back to there, and yet I really wanted to be an iconographer and I really wanted to be a monk. So I ended up I found a monastery in France, Orthodox monastery, where they were painting icons as well, and spent a bit of time there, and then asked them if I could go there as a novice, and they said, yeah, they made me a novice, got to put my cassock back on, was back in the game, and I stayed there. I was very happy. It was about 9 of us, and that was much more, you know, official and, you know, organized and real than just Father Seraphim and I living out in the sticks, and I was very happy there. But over time, I realized the way I was speaking, the conversations I was having with the abbot there, that they had the impression I was going to stay there for the rest of my life. And I kept thinking, but I'm going to go back to South Africa and I'm going to make that place in South Africa work. Like, that was my idea, that's where my heart was. I really wanted to go back to that place, you know, with Father Seraphim or with not, but to go there and build a monastery there. And then they said to me, no, you'll be here for the rest of your life. And, you know, I mean, they were right. You know, if you're in a monastery, what does it matter where you are? You know, the world for you ends at the monastery walls. But my heart was just burning within me, and it took me a long time to make this decision whether or not to stay in that monastery, because you start to get so confused about things like obedience and responsibility and temptation, this, and, you know, and I got so confused and worked up, but eventually I made the decision. I said, I've got to go back to South Africa, but there was nothing for me to go back to yet. And having left that monastery as a novice, I'm still not a monk, you know, and I mean, you can't walk around then with your cassock on and say, oh, I'm a novice, you know, you have to take it off again. When you've been wearing that thing for so long, you feel like you're naked when you walk around with it without it afterwards.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what to do. I could paint at least by that point, more or less. And you know, I wanted to go back to South Africa, but there was nothing there, and I wanted to be a monk. So I ended up finding this guy, Father Gabriel, who's still around, Father Gabriel Bunga, who was a hermit living in Switzerland. We had read one of his books during lunchtime at the monastery, and I remember having quite an impression from that book, and he was in Switzerland, so I got hold of him. And I said, you know, mind if I come and stay with you for some time to sort of recollect my thoughts and, you know, speak with him or whatever. And I mean, he was already in his 70s by then, and he'd been a monk for 50 years, you know, hermit for 30 years. And I went up there, and it was, you really literally have to walk through the forest, and, you know, you don't park your car, you have to walk on a footpath through the forest to go find him, and he's living up there in the mountains. And yeah, he was great. I mean, he was very experienced, the real deal. And so I said to him, and the way his setup was basically that we each had our own little house, whatever you want to call it, little, you know, basic building with 1 room, 2 rooms, and a bathroom / a little kitchen there as well. And so you would live there basically the whole day. We would see each other. I would go to his house and his little dwelling in the morning, get his blessing. Wouldn't see him until lunchtime. We had lunch together, and then before going to bed, I would get his blessing as well. And that's it. We didn't see each other the rest of the time. And I was happy with that too. I mean, I was just painting the rest of the time. So that worked out fine, you know. And I said to him, can I be a novice again here? So he accepted. But I needed more painting equipment. And seeing as I'd left the other monastery where they had a studio, I didn't have anything. I had to go back to South Africa. I still had a return ticket for Christmas. You know, normally I used to go back to celebrate Christmas with my family. So I went back to South Africa, and as soon as that airplane touched the ground, I just knew that I didn't want to leave, that my heart was there. I just wanted to be in South Africa, and you know, I was so confused because I gave Father Gabriel my word, and I still want to be a monk, and what are the possibilities for me to be a monk here, and I want to paint, and oh man, all of these different elements, so confusing. Anyway, I had a massive epileptic seizure. It was like being struck by lightning. And I was at the shops, fell into a rack of books and broke my nose and blood everywhere and convulsing and whatever. It was awful. And
it doesn't sound pleasant.
No, you know. But then you see, this is where I've learned a lot about spiritual discernment, because then people were like, well, you see, the devil is attacking you physically now because you're not letting him in mentally, so it's actually a good thing. And I'm thinking, I'm not feeling too good. But, Father gave my word that I would go, and I did enjoy the life there. It's just I wanted to be in South Africa. I enjoyed the hermit's life, it was fine. And but I gave him my word, so I got myself together, got the medication regulated, because they scanned me and they said, well, this kid's brain is like a nuclear reactor. So
how old were you at this point?
Must have been about 25.
Oh, right, okay, so quite young.
Yeah, a bit older maybe, actually, come to think of it. Yeah, maybe this is more like towards my late 20s, actually.
Right, okay.
28, 29, something like that. And so I got the medication regulated and whatever, and I went back with all my painting equipment, dragged it all the way up that hill, get there, started living with Father Gabriel, and I was fine. Like I said, the lifestyle didn't bother me, but my heart was just burning within me, and eventually I said to him, sorry, but I can't, I have to go back to South Africa. And he said, there's nothing there for you, like in terms of monastic life.
Yeah.
And I said, I know. And he says, you can't keep chasing this because you've been doing it for 3 years now. I mean, all of this was over a period of 3 years in and out of monasteries. And I said, I know. And he said, oh, well, he says, you could have been a monk and you could have, but you can't force things, you know what I mean? So he says, you're going to have to go out and live in the world, and you're just going to have to fend for yourself in the world. And he said, it's a different thing living in the world than living in a monastery. And I was thinking, oh, I know, I have to do it. Anyway, so I went back to South Africa, and at least I had peace of mind that I was in that country, and I knew I had to be there. There was no possibility of following any kind of monastic life there. But I did get hold of the local bishop, because I decided, let me just take this matter into my own hands. I couldn't rely on Father Seraphim or anything, so I got hold of the local bishop eventually, and he had a meeting with him and just explained the story. And he said to me, we have 2 types of priests, married and unmarried. Let's see. Big Greek guy. And I was like, well, I didn't come here to ask about priesthood. I actually came here to tell you my situation, that I want to be a monk really, and is there nothing that's going on here in this diocese? And anyway, so I just left it at that. And then next day or a day or two later, I had a phone call from another priest, Father Petros, who said, oh, I saw the bishop today and he mentioned that you had a conversation with him. Would you like to come to my parish and just spend the Sunday, come visit? And his parish was attached to the Greek school. And so yeah, sure, I went there, and we got along very well. And then he offered me a job as church warden. And so I thought, well, at least I'm still close to the church, and I'm still somehow functioning within the church. I'm not on the monastic stuff anymore as such, but I could have still remained celibate, and I could have still tried to lead some kind of a monastic life in the world like that. But the way things went, I met my wife in the choir, and that was the end of the monastic stuff. Not that I just was out of control, but it just flowed.
Yeah.
I met her, and things just happened so naturally for the first time in all of those years. Because that's kind of what I realized when I left Father Gabriel, is God, he was looking at all these things I was doing, and he was saying, this is wonderful. It's great that you're trying to be a monk and putting yourself through all of this, but I didn't ask you to do any of this. I didn't make you go and put yourself through this punishment. If you want to do it, you can do it. Kingdom of heaven suffers violence. Violence take it by force. But I didn't make you do that. And I realized it's true. You kind of make your own ideas about how you think you should interact with God. And when I met my wife, my future wife, all of that just went away, and everything just flowed. I didn't have to think about things. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of because I was so involved with the church as church warden, and getting sort of more involved. It was sort of understood that they wanted me to become a priest, and then it sort of just happened. I was married, and not long after that they made me a deacon. I was deacon for over a year, and then they say basically, well, it's time to make you a priest now. And then it happened that way, and I stayed at that parish the whole time, from being altar boy to church warden to, actually, when I was already a priest, I was still doing the job of altar boy. Like, that never changed. I did it all, but yeah, I stayed there, and then things got complicated in South Africa, and my wife and I decided. I mean, we had 2 children then, and we decided that it was time to leave. And I've never felt that desire to go back to South Africa again like I had at that time, because I don't know, I mean, things just changed. I don't know why, but I had to go back to South Africa. Was it to meet my wife? Was it to become a priest? Who knows? But that's just how it happened. And now we've taken the next step, and we're here at St. Elizabeth's Parish and serving as a priest, and things are fine. Things are good.
That's good. So, when you were in South Africa, as my understanding, you were under the Greek jurisdiction.
Yes.
And here we're in the Church Abroad, which is the Russian jurisdiction. Are there any differences that you notice, whether, the way they do the Paschal Troparion is a bit different, anything that you find noteworthy that's different between the jurisdictions?
Well, it's like chalk and cheese. It's all orthodoxy, and the spirit that runs through it is all the same,
Yeah.
You can feel that, but it is very different on so many levels. I mean, just culturally, it's different. Russians and Greeks, two totally different types of people. So regardless of church, you already have that cultural difference. Then, and I mean, of course, our churches are cultural. They're culturally influenced. We have ethnicities to our churches, and when it comes to the church, the first thing you see, well, the first thing that you'll find different if you go into an Orthodox church as opposed to here is that you see people crossing themselves and venerating icons all the time. And my wife came here, she said, "Why are they crossing themselves so much? Why are they kissing the icons all the time?" But that's just the habit of Russian piety. The Greeks don't have that sort of piety. Well, generally speaking.
Yeah.
The Greeks, it's just a little more chaotic. The Russians are more behaved in church. The singing is totally different. The Byzantine chant is very exotic to the Western ear. The Russian chant is much more adaptable, can relate to it. The way they do the liturgy, okay, it's the same liturgy, but there's little differences, and that whole vibe is just different. You just feel it's different.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's one body and one.
Sorry about that. We had a technical malfunction with the camera, and it stopped recording. So we were talking about the cultural differences between the Greek and the Russian jurisdictions that you've experienced. Have you experienced any other differences since you've transitioned from the Greek to the Russian jurisdiction?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much was before we cut off, but I mentioned specifically the singing is very different, and very exotic. In terms of spirituality, because culture is one thing, culture affects things, but in terms of spirituality, the Russians are much more, they give the impression in any case of being much more strict, much more devout, much more sort of focused, which is nice. For certain personalities, and generally speaking for Western personalities, it seems to work well. However, what I have found in the Russian church, which is a bit difficult, is that because they are so pious, because they are so single-minded in that way, it tends to make a rift between the spiritual ones, or the ones that are really coming to church and being devout, and then the other ones who can't keep up with it, and then those other ones just sort of go completely AWOL because they think, So you have this really sharp divide, whereas the Greeks are a lot more sort of just taking it in their stride, and maybe they're not as devout, and maybe they're not as dedicated, but you see there seems to be less of a rupture between the ones who are really into it and the ones who are not.
Yeah.
But it's different strokes for different folks. It's just about what works, really. People choose their own level of involvement in the church in any case, regardless of which church you're going to.
No, definitely. So we're going to start to wrap up now, but I'll ask you one final question. If you could give a message to Westerners out there in general, whether they be in South Africa or in England or America or elsewhere, who aren't Orthodox, and you could say anything to them, what would that be?
I'd say, if you're watching this, you're already one step there to discovering the truth of God on earth. You can't say things to people that'll make them, convince them and let them be able to see what you see. But I could certainly put it forward and encourage it with all my heart, because it's like I was saying earlier, I went through a long journey to get there, and And I honestly believe that when a person seeks wholeheartedly, they will find orthodoxy, because it is sometimes difficult to find it. Sometimes God does test you to get through to here. But if you are willing to sacrifice your own ideas of what's right and wrong, your own personal preferences about how you want to feel in your spiritual life, if you're willing to sacrifice all of those things, relationships maybe that you have with people, maybe business relationships, all sorts of things, God forbid you should have to make any kind of massive rupture, but if you're willing, truly willing to sacrifice all of those things, I believe God will reveal himself to you through his church, through Orthodoxy. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, and anyone can do it. As Westerners, we almost have a sort of one-up on the locals, on the cradle Orthodox, because we have that sincerity to find it. A lot of the cradle Orthodox just take it for granted, and they don't have that kind of sincere and strong faith. So for Western people who are dying spiritually, who are so spiritually thirsty, this is it. This is where you can be filled.
Yeah, no, definitely, and you see that with a lot of the converts I know, because they had to make sacrifices to get here. Our deacon drives 4.5 hours to get to our parish, and he's very pious.
You do too.
Well, I don't drive that far, but yeah. But there are a lot of the converts, they are willing to travel long distances, or make a number of sacrifices, because they went through so much to get here that once they're here, it's like, well, I already went through that much to get here, so.
Yeah. And God rewards that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think we're going to wrap up here. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much for your time, Father.
Pleasure.
It has been really enjoyable, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future for another video.
With pleasure.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
Thank you.